In this video, we're going to talk about setting up a local environment using the Ubuntu operating system. For the tutorials in this set of Linux lessons, you'll need to have access to a system to practice on. There are two versions of Linux used in the lessons, Ubuntu and CentOS. Both of these versions are freely available for download on the internet. For your practice system, you will need to have an account on the system that has all of the access, so all the privileged access, super user account basically. You can use this administrator account, which on Linux is called root, but that's not generally the way you will access remote Linux systems. Linux has a tool called sudo, S-U-D-O, that will allow regular user accounts to have administrative privileges temporarily so that they can run special commands that require the use of the privileged account, things like installing packages or running services. You'll want to have the account you choose to use have this access. It can be configured to require password or not. For the tutorials, we'll look at Ubuntu version 14.04. Ubuntu releases regular updates, so this might not be the most recent version of Ubuntu when you watch this video, but is a version that has long-term support from the Ubuntu team, so it should still be around. To give you a good environment to work with, you'll want to install VirtualBox and Vagrant. These tools allow you to keep the environment available, but not always running when you aren't using it. VirtualBox is the virtualization software that will run on various host operating systems, and you can host a number of different operating systems as guests. VirtualBox can be run by itself, using the graphical user interface to manage the guest systems. Vagrant is a tool that will help you manage multiple virtual guests via a text-based set of configuration files and can be used with tools other than VirtualBox. To find an Ubuntu box to work with via Vagrant, we can go to Atlas and look for the Ubuntu systems in particular. I'm going to be using Ubuntu systems packaged by the Bento project because they're generally small and are updated regularly. To find the Bento project boxes, I can go to atlas.hashicorp.com/bento. So you can see here that there's lots of options. Here's the new 16.04 release of Ubuntu that just came out, the 15.04, which is sort of a development release. If you use a different environment to practice on, set up your account with sudo access. You'll need to know the password for the root account on your system. If you've installed Linux directly onto a spare desktop or laptop that you have, you will have set the root password during the installation of the operating system itself. There are a few ways to add your regular user to the sudoers list. The first way is to log in as root and run the command vi sudo. That will open the sudoers file. So I have my Ubuntu system here. Let's see if it's running. And it is, so I will log into it. Now, one of the good things about choosing to use Vagrant images for these tutorials is that the Vagrant user is already set up with all the access that you need. To look at how that works, I'm actually just going to become the root user for a minute. So you can see that my prompt has changed there in the corner. I'm now root. And this opens a temporary buffer. So it's made a copy of the sudoers file into a temporary space so that if I make a mistake, it doesn't lock me out of the system. So the sudoers file has some pretty specific syntax to it. And if you mess that up, there's a chance that you can't get into the system. So you can see in the sudoers file, there's a bunch of different things. Here's how the root access is set up for the root account. It has all the access. Members of the admin group may gain root privileges right there on that line. There's another group called sudo, which can also execute any command. So depending on your version of Linux, that may be set up in a couple of different ways. Here in this line, it says see sudoers 5. That means that there is a man page in the Linux manual for sudoers, but it's in chapter 5. And if I wanted to look for that specific page, I would need to type man space 5 space sudoers to get the specific information it's referencing. In this version of Ubuntu as well, I can put includes in a separate directory, which is super easy if I'm adding like a new service and I want it to have its own specific commands that it allows and things like that. So there's a lot of different things that can go into these privileges, certain users, as well as certain commands. The example file here on Ubuntu is pretty slim, but you can refer to the documentation if you want to do anything more specific than that. So if I wanted to add my user here directly, I would type in the username, and then I would give it all the commands. And I want this no password, so I don't want to have to type in Vagrant's password all the time, and that's what I need there. When I have these commands like up here for the admin users here, without the no password directive, that means that when an admin user uses sudo, it has to type in its own password. It's not typing in the root account's password. It's typing in its own password to reestablish that the correct user is sort of still at that console. So now it tells me that I made a syntax error. And I can either edit the file again, exit without saving changes, or quit and save changes to the sudoers file, which I know could be potentially dangerous and lock me out of the system. So I'm actually going to exit without saving it. So you want to be very careful about the sudoers file and how your user gets added to it. In some installation methods, you may get the option to add your user directly to the sudoers file anyway, so you should go ahead and do that. So you now have a system ready to continue on with the rest of the tutorials in this set for all of the Ubuntu content. If you want to, you can check your permissions with an update. So I typed sudo apt-get update just to test. I can update the packages on the system, and then I'm going to do a upgrade to download all of the new fixes and bug updates, security updates, those kinds of things. So my system will be completely up to date. If you got to these commands and you got an error that your user wasn't allowed to use the sudo command to do those, you want to make sure you go back and add in that sudoers entry. So again, that was sudo apt-get upgrade. So now I'm ready to go. I can use this system for the rest of the videos in this tutorial set. And if I want to try out some of the commands on later versions of Ubuntu, I could go back and download those from Atlas if I wanted to. So for more information about Ubuntu and to learn about Ubuntu's graphical interfaces, which are not covered in this tutorial track, you can visit ubuntu.com.